This is section 1.2, domain and range. So last time we talked about functions and relations, and we talked a little bit about domain and range, but today we're going to focus on it a little bit more. So remember, domain is the set of all inputs, so all the x values, and range is the set of all outputs, or the y values. So there are two ways to write domain and range. The first one we're more familiar with is set notation. So that works when the domain is discrete. So when it's just like a set of points, that's when we use set notation. If it's a graph where it's continuous, we're going to use what's called interval notation. So interval notation is just another way to write inequalities. So the basics of interval notation, you write the smallest term or the smallest number first, followed by a comma, and then the largest number. Okay, so the lower bound, comma, upper bound. And then we have to decide whether we're going to use parentheses or brackets. So just a reminder, parentheses are the ones that are curved, brackets are the ones that are square. If the bound, lower or higher, is not included, so if it's an open hole, then we're going to use parentheses. If it is included, we're going to use a bracket. Take note that with infinity, we are always going to use parentheses. Because infinity is not like an actual number, it's just something that we approach. We keep going on and on and on forever and ever. It never actually reaches a number. We're going to use parentheses because you can't include it. So let's do some examples of finding domain. So looking here at this first one, find the domain of the function. So this one is a discrete function, which means we're going to use set notation for the domain. So the domain is all the x values, so we have 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Done. I'll let you do the second one as practice, and then let's look at the third one. Notice that the third one is a function, so we might want to graph that. Okay, so if we graphed it, x squared minus 1, notice that that's going to look something like this. So let's think about what the domain of the function is. We're looking at x values. It keeps going on forever and ever in either direction. So there's no x that we can't plug in. So our domain, we start at negative infinity and we go to positive infinity. And we're going to use parentheses because remember, we always use parentheses with infinities. I will leave the second one for you to try on your own. And let's look at this graph, finding the domain and the range. So sometimes what helps is to try to draw a box around it. So I know that my domain starts here and ends here. My range is going to start down here and end here. So how can we write this? Well, it's continuous, so we're going to use our interval notation again. So let's talk about the domain. The domain starts, it's kind of hard to see here. Domain starts here at negative 3. So our lower bound is negative 3, comma, our upper bound is going to be 1, because that's as far right as it goes. Now we have to decide parentheses or bracket. So negative 3, notice that we have a hole. That means that point is not included. You can get as close and close and close to that as possible, but it's actually not included. So that's going to be a parenthesis. The point at 1, negative 4, is included. So that means we are going to use a bracket. Looks a little weird, but get used to it. We're going to be using that from now on. Let's talk about the range now. So we go low to high. The lowest is -4. The highest is 0. Notice that at -4 we have 2 different points. We have one here and one here. They're both included, so that one's going to be a bracket. You only need one of them to be included in order to use a bracket. They both don't have to be included. At 0, again, we have 2. We have an open and a closed. That closed is going to override the open, and we're going to use a bracket. So the domain is from -4 to 0, both included. All right, let's look at a piecewise function and make it a little bit more difficult. I already graphed it for us over here. So let's try to look at the domain and range. Let's start with the domain. So notice that it starts over at -infinity. Okay, it goes on and on and on forever in the left direction. So it starts at -infinity. And then at 1, we have that break. But since it's not continuous, I know it's not continuous, but since we have this point here, and then we start up again over here, we're going to treat it as if it was continuous when we're stating the domain. We're not going to have to break it up. Same thing at 2. Just because we have one closed circle, it's included, and then it continues on another piece, it's going to work. It's going to go forever and ever in the right direction, so it's going to go to infinity. Remember, infinities, we always use parentheses, so there we go. For the range, low to high, we want to think what's the lowest number we have, which appears to be 0. And the highest we go is to infinity. It's going to go up and up and up and up and up on both sides, actually. So infinity, we know, is going to use a parenthesis. And then we have to determine if this is going to be a bracket or a parenthesis. For the 0, even though there's not a closed dot there, we assume it's a closed unless you have that open circle. So this is going to be a bracket. That's it for domain and range and interval.